arranging that $130,000 payment to keep the porn star quiet about an alleged affair between herself and Mr. Trump.
Now, Stormy, whose real name is Stephanie Clifford, spoke with CNN last night and sort of addressed the issue.
I think it's pretty clear that with the new developments comes new interest.
Nick Valencia is live in Fort Lauderdale, where Stormy just made a stop on her tour. I'm going to leave the name of the tour to you this morning, Nick. What is Stormy saying?
Well, according to her team, we should start there. This is not her idea to have this tour. This is just part of her regular dance performances that she's already scheduled. The clubs have a different take on that. But here last night, we came down to see her first live performance since she filed a lawsuit in Los Angeles Superior Court over this non-disclosure agreement, which she says is now null and void because the President of the United States, the man she's accused of having an alleged affair with, did not sign that document. Now, she performed in front of about 200 people last night, and we did not think, in fact, we were told explicitly she would not be talking to the media. But after her performance, she had a meet and greet, and it was then that she agreed to an interview. She didn't want to talk about the litigation. In fact, she said she had no comment for the president, but she did talk about how this alleged affair with the president is affecting her.
Sort of been a double-edged sword where a lot of people are very interested in booking me for dancing and stuff like that. So I'm getting more dance bookings. I usually only dance once a month, and now I'm dancing 3 or 4 times a month. So that's been really great. But because of that, it's sort of overshadowing a lot of the adult films that I'm supposed to be promoting. And a lot of the mainstream projects that I was actively working on have been indefinitely put on hold.
Now, Daniels gives this interview less than 24 hours after we've learned that Michael Cohen, the personal attorney of the president, used his professional email address to communicate with Stormy Daniels' attorney. Michael Cohen is saying this is not a blockbuster development. He uses his professional email address to communicate for personal reasons all the time. And he released a statement here saying, I'm going to read part of that, saying, the use of my company email to communicate with the bank and Ms. Clifford's former counsel proves absolutely nothing, despite the less than convincing comments offered by Mr. Avenatti, her former attorney. I use this email address for virtually everything, as many people do. Now, the attorney for Ms. Daniels is saying that this is not the case. He's calling his bluff, calling Mr. Cohen's bluff, saying that this is further proof that he wasn't acting in a personal capacity or in a freelance capacity, but rather an official one for the president.
If, in fact, the payment was being made personally by Attorney Cohen, he wouldn't need his office open in order to effectuate the payment.
There's a lot of anxiety, we're told, in the White House that this story is now beginning to overshadow the day-to-day operations of the president. For her part, Miss Stormy Daniels is scheduled to perform here at the Solid Gold Gentlemen's Club here in Pompano Beach later today. The story showing no signs of going away anytime soon, guys.
All right, Nick Valencia for us there in Fort Lauderdale. You know, just the details of this story. We were supposed to say the name of this tour.
I couldn't believe you didn't do it.
I just couldn't say it. I mean, some of the tawdry elements of what is happening test some of the bounds that we have for ourselves.
Yes, it does. We came into work today and said, this is what we're talking about. This is what we're talking about.
All right, let's get now to Margaret Taliff.
Yeah, CNN political analyst and senior White House correspondent for Bloomberg News. Margaret, thank you so much for being here. How potentially, at the end of the day, dangerous is this for President Trump? For his policy, for his plans, for himself in the White House and the policy that he wants to get done?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you have to look at it on at least a couple of levels. One is the legal liability to President Trump, to his lawyer, to the campaign, and whether that opens him up to anything from depositions to, some sort of liability. But then on the other hand, you have the political side of this, which is, what is the impact going to be? Does this erode any of his standing or support from evangelicals? So far, they've held very firmly behind him because of his willingness to pursue, policies from, anti-abortion legislation or policies to support of judicial nominees. Does this erode that at all? Does it erode the president's support from mainstream Republicans who now control the 2 chambers of Congress, but also it is potentially a distraction from trying to get tax policy done, infrastructure work done, a lot of the foreign policy machinations, and could it come in any way to Bob Mueller's investigation? I think that's kind of the next tranche of questions.
Yeah, Margaret, at least twice yesterday, by my count, Sarah Sanders during the briefing said that she'd spoken about this extensively and didn't have anything else to add. Is that really, considering how and at which speed this is growing, a tenable position? And it's unusual that the president has not talked about this even on Twitter for something that's become such a major issue.
Yeah, well, I mean, that wasn't the most forthcoming answer, although it's probably the best answer for now. The last time that the press secretary tried to talk about this from the podium, she actually opened the president up to more exposure. That was the acknowledgement about the arbitration proceeding. So it sounds like the lesson and the takeaway for the president's press team at this point is don't try to fuel the spectacle, but it's not going to stop the questions from coming. And more importantly, it's not going to stop whatever the theoretical, legal, and campaign issues are that may be kind of moving along behind the scenes. But the sort of cardinal rule on this is if you if you don't really have enough information to talk about it from the podium, don't talk about it from the podium.
All righty, Margaret, I want to move on to another issue that's come up, this letter from President Trump to President Putin back in 2013, inviting President Putin to the pageant that President Trump, then citizen Trump, of course, was having. The Miss Universe pageant was in Russia. Not unusual, would you think, really, though, at the end of the day, for a businessman of his stature to reach out to somebody, a leader in another country, and invite them? Yes, no?
Well, yeah, in the context of Donald Trump, 2013 businessman, the letter makes a lot of sense and isn't particularly surprising. In the context of President Trump, 14 months into office and ensconced in this probe that involves looking at his relationship with Russians, the context becomes more complicated. And so this is yet another piece of information that the special prosecutors team can look at to try to understand the threads and the connections between now the president and his associates and President Putin and his associates.
Margaret, let me ask you about this reporting from Gabe Sherman in Vanity Fair. Sourcing a Republican with frequent contact with the White House says that President Trump now is in command, has been in the job for more than a year. He now has the levers of power to work, and he doesn't give an expletive there. Trump's decision to circumvent the policy process and impose tariffs on imported steel and aluminum reflects his emboldened desire to follow his impulses and defy his advisors. He was like an expletive, you, Kelly. Trump is red hot about Kelly trying to control him. Are we seeing a rebellious president here with the unexpected acceptance of this invitation from Kim Jong-un and the addition of the tariffs? And could we see some shifts in the staff around him?
Well, it's right to see that the pendulum has swung a bit, and part of this has to do with the departure of Rob Porter as the staff secretary, who was the gatekeeper on the flow of a lot of information. And also some of this has to do with now the impending departure of Gary Cohn. The president has a number of these campaign promises that he wants to fulfill, and a number of instincts about foreign policy in North Korea that he's been thinking about for a while. I interviewed him, a colleague and I interviewed him last May. It's been not even a year, and at that time he was saying he was open to talking directly with Kim. At that time, his staff pretty quickly clarified, well, under circumstances, none of which have been met yet. But I think the president was speaking from the gut at that time, and for the past year has been thinking about, should he talk directly with Kim? Could that make a difference? So you are seeing him take matters into his own hands. And on the one hand, he's the commander-in-chief. He is the ultimate decider, and he should be the one who decides what to do. But on the other hand, he has gone a lot of times around his staff, bypassed his staff. And when he makes these announcements, sometimes, in this case, there's not much warning, and everyone else who is there to try to support him and stand up